If you're autistic, like me, then you've experienced frautonomy. In fact, it's quite likely you feel it every day. Autonomy, as I'm sure you know, is a personal freedom thing. The availability, expectation, or need for autonomy is all about making decisions for ourselves, without being unduly influenced, coerced, or forced. Revolutions have been fought and governments fallen when myopic leaders denied the autonomy of their people. But to an autist like me, loss of autonomy is also one of the most likely everyday triggers for meltdowns or shutdowns, stress events that happen when we get overloaded. It's no secret that autistic people feel a stronger need than most for autonomy. It's even in the name, the ought bit. But it's surprising how few people outside the autistic bubble actually realise how important it is or how easy it is to trample over it. We need to make our own choices or our brains start to melt. But therein lies a massive contradiction. Because whether we like it or not, autistic folks also have a well-deserved reputation for being indecisive. We hum and ha, ask lots of questions, and often end up giving people 3 different answers, each with qualifiers and caveats, because we still can't tie ourselves down to one. That's frautonomy. That anxious limbo state between the need to make a decision for ourselves on one side and a complete paralysis when it comes to actually making that decision. It's confusing. It's fraught. It's frautonomy. I'm Quinn and I'm autistic, and this is Autismatic. So why not get yourself a cuppa like I have, sit yourself down and join me for a chat about autistic frautonomy. Cards on the table, I did not come up with the word frautonomy myself. That honour goes to British comedian Hugh Dennis. Not long ago, he was a guest on the BBC Radio 4 panel show Unspeakable, a witty and cosy panel show about the history and quirks of the English language, hosted by Phil Wang and Susie Dent from Countdown. Each of the 3 celebrity guests suggests a new word to add to the dictionary, something there isn't a word for yet, and Hugh's suggestion was frautonomy. I don't know if Hugh's autistic, and it doesn't really matter, to be honest, because you don't have to be autistic to feel the unique internal tension of frautonomy. But if you're autistic, you definitely know that feeling. Intimately. It's creeping into everyone's world a little lately, though, and you'll hear it in the gripes and moans people exchange on social media, in the pub, and around the water cooler. We live in a world which celebrates the variety and choice available to us, but often makes choosing itself a chore. Sadie was complaining to Martha down at Help the Aged about the doctors giving her choices she didn't feel she should be making. Why was he asking her if she wanted a camera down there? He should be telling her if she needed it or not. Isn't he meant to be the expert? Ben, Bahram and Bodhi couldn't make sense of all the options in the online insurance form they filled in together for their student digs and ended up guessing what everything meant. So when they got burgled, their claim got turned down. And Jennifer has been rereading her benefits application for weeks now and is still none the wiser about how she's supposed to answer half the questions, despite watching dozens of YouTube videos and ringing the helpline so many times she hears the whole music in her sleep now. The frustration of frautonomy is felt when the weight on our shoulders of the answer required of us outbalances our confidence in answering, which is why it's a feature of every autistic life. Whichever of the 3 leaves of the triad affects you most, emotional differences, sensory ups and downs, or your need for accuracy and repeatability or veracity, every autist feels frautonomy almost as often as we see the backs of our own eyelids. A couple of weeks ago, I made a video about what happens when questions blow up in our faces. Often it happens when we're asked to perform a task and we ask questions about the task. Folks frequently misconstrue our questions as defiance or delaying tactics and get annoyed with us. But what's actually going on is frautonomy. When Hugh described frautonomy on the radio, his version hinged on responsibility. It was the direct consequence of autonomy itself that frazzled his synapses. obligation. When we accept responsibility, we also accept the obligation to carry out that responsibility, and most people feel that weight as a burden, even if it's one that we ask for. Some decisions we routinely expect, even demand, that people take their time over them. Wedding bans, for instance, cooling off periods on phone contracts, or getting surveys done on the house that you want to buy. The law dictates that some decisions aren't to be taken lightly, and everyone who isn't a sociopath or a malignant narcissist knows what it's like to feel the weight of a life-changing decision on their shoulders. But that's not frautonomy. That's, for want of a better word, normal. What Hugh described was a lot closer to the autistic frautonomy I'm talking about today. It can happen over any and every decision we have to make. In Hugh's words, deciding which schools to send his kids to go to was expected to be hard, but paralysis over which colour paint to buy to decorate his hallway with is frautonomy. He chose to be in charge of remodelling the entranceway, but then got paralysed by the responsibility, transfixed with anxiety over making the wrong decision. And that description rang clarion bells in my head. It's so close to what so many autistic people experience on a daily basis that I had to borrow the word. But it's not just the responsibility of decisions that causes autistic frautonomy. Oh, no. Responsibility is often part of it, but it's rarely there on its own. Yes, we absolutely feel the weight of other people's expectations and reliance upon us, and the desire to live up to those is always there for most of us. But there's so much more going on. If you watch Autostomatic regularly, then you might have noticed that I've mentioned autistic veracity quite a lot recently. It's because it's possibly the most important yet least well understood of the three primary differences between autistic folks and everyone who isn't autistic. I view autism through something called the triad of distinction. It's a way of understanding what's going on in our world by focusing on the three main areas of disparity between how autistic people experience and relate to the world against the everyday lives of everyone else. There's emotional differences like alexithymia and how our empathy works. There's sensory differences like synesthesia and hyper or hyposensitivities. And then there's the ones that get put down as mainly behavioural. Need for routines, PDA, communication barriers. They're down to that there autistic veracity. If there's anything in the saying that autistic traits are just human traits, only more so, then it's found within our sense of veracity. Veracity is what drives humans to seek routine, repetition, clarity, and accuracy. It draws us to consistency, trust, and reliability. For autists, our veracity is one of the main reasons we can find it hard to make decisions. It causes many of our communication barriers and contributes to lots and lots of background processing differences that the world at large usually describes as being weird. But everybody has a sense of veracity. You could be the most ardent adrenaline junkie thrill seeker by day, but still like to relax in the familiar and routine when the sun goes down. And even hardened, pathological liars still need to know the truth themselves to ground the lies they tell. We need a sense of veracity to be able to function in a society of any size. Much as I wish it weren't so, the human race has proven to occasionally be a deceptive and sometimes downright nasty bunch when it wants to be, and without a functioning sense of veracity we'd be utterly lost. Having a sense of what's right and wrong, truth and lie, plausible or off-your-rocker madness is an essential skill. But autistic veracity is a little different. It performs the same functions as non-autistic veracity, protecting us from the harms of the unexpected and the false. But it's tuned way higher than the average, which the rest of the world sees in two ways. First, we can seem to be very rigid and set in our ways, reluctant to change routines and uncomfortable when prevented from performing them. And second, we might need much more information and perhaps reassurance before we can tamp down our anxiety enough to feel confident about making a decision or committing to an action. Which is why so-called analysis paralysis is a big contributor to frautonomy. There's not an autist alive who doesn't tie themselves up in knots over simple decisions, because we're missing some vital piece of the puzzle to make everything clear. We're like the TV detective who thinks he's got all the clues he's gonna get, but it just ain't coming together yet. There must be something he's missing. But we're not doing it over a murder case. We're doing it over what movie to watch tonight, or whether to wash the dishes or empty the bins first. Decisions that most folk wouldn't fret over. Even Hugh's choice of paint colour for his hallway seems like an earth-shatteringly important choice when compared to some of the decisions that wrap autistic brains in elastic bands and bounce them around the room. Because veracity is only part of it. The emotional side of autism can cause its own kind of blockages. Because almost every decision has an emotional impact. But how can you work out what that impact might be when you don't even know how you feel before you make the choice? At least half of autistic people couldn't honestly answer the question, how do you feel, without taking time to think about it, weighing up the evidence and trying to make an informed choice. Because at least half of autistic people are alexithemic. Alexithemia is when the shaky connection between our feelings and our conscious thoughts breaks down. It's a little spectrum of its own because there are different degrees of alexithemia, and even they can change when we're stressed, tired, or overworked. On the one end, it's kind of like we just can't find the right way to say our feelings out loud. It's on the tip of our tongue almost, but the words escape us. At its full strength, I call it robot mode. Almost all connection with our higher emotions is lost, and we operate on a more or less logical footing until they come back. That usually only happens to me at times of great stress, but for some of my friends it doesn't take much to flip the switch. But part of almost every decision-making process is an emotional one. No matter how much we try to tell ourselves otherwise, making decisions is heavily influenced by how we feel in the moment, how we feel about any people involved, and our opinions on whatever's being said, done, proposed, or discussed. We're taught in school and in church to consider our decisions carefully, to make informed choices and think about the consequences of our actions, all part of a mature, thoughtful, and pragmatic decision-making process. But when the pros and cons of everything on the table balance out evenly, when there isn't a clear choice, it's emotion that tips our decisions one way or the other. Nothing measurable to say that P is objectively more of a suitable choice than Q? Then you need something to break the deadlock, and emotion is the most common tiebreaker. But when alexithemia is present, those emotions might be opaque to us, or not visible to us at all. Do you see the problem now? When we're not dithering over decisions because we're lacking information, we're confabulating between options without a clear leader or favourite because we lack an emotionally motivated preference. That brings us onto our last-ditch option for getting decisions out of the way: consequence juggling. If we've already been pushed into robot mode, this can be really difficult because this isn't about practical consequences of our decisions. That's already been done when we were in the fact-finding stage. We're trying to work out what the personal and social consequences of our choices would be, how people will feel about it. And when your emotions are off taking a spa break, that's 10 times harder. So it becomes little more than a guessing game over what people will think of the possible decisions we could make once they're in effect. Will they like it? Loathe it? Want to rip me a new one because of it? We're at a disadvantage the moment we start down this road though, because as we've already touched on, autistic empathy doesn't work in the same way as non-autistic empathy. That applies to both affective empathy, the infectious quality of feelings like the spread of laughter or commiserating with someone else, and cognitive empathy, so-called theory of mind. Empathy is not just about knowing how people feel in the moment. It's about predicting how people will feel in a given set of conditions. Since most people's senses, emotions, and veracity thresholds are set up in similar ways, that makes the empathy process between two average non-autistic people reasonably accurate, Better than 50% for certain, and some people better than that. Successful entertainers, salespeople and politicians are often well above average. But that doesn't work when there's someone autistic in the mix. Our emotional processes, sensory inputs and need for consistency and accuracy aren't the same. And the further apart they are from the average, the more the potential for mishaps and shenanigans. Empathy is often described as walking in someone else's shoes. But if that's the case, then autistic shoes are a different size to everyone else's. Your shoes are too tight on us, and ours flop around on your feet, so neither of us can actually properly walk in each other's shoes if we tried. But we can imagine what it might be like, and sometimes that's enough. But it's haphazard compared to having a brain that functions more or less the same as the majority around you. Remember that when I make a choice, I'm satisfying my prickly sense of autistic veracity first, while my feelings could be bobbing about on the surface with me or buried in an emotional Mariana Trench because of alexithymia. So my decision-making process isn't the same as someone whose brain doesn't have to do all that. Predicting or imagining what someone else would do or think under those circumstances is made all the more difficult by the knowledge that a lot of the time other people wouldn't make the choices I would. So I end up second-guessing myself over and over again. I don't want to hurt people, annoy them, or inconvenience them. But if I can't predict how they'll react to each and every one of the choices available to me, then I might as well be buying a lottery ticket. One thing that's not as random as a lottery ticket is a subscription to Autonomy, where once a week you'll always win a slice of autistic life delivered on a shiny YouTube platter. And if you're up for a second weekly dose of my stuff and nonsense, then become a patron and get another new video every Wednesday as well, along with a warm, fuzzy feeling of knowing you've become a part of making all this happen. So, if you like what I do here, please do the old likey, subscribey thing, hype the video if you can, and if you can afford a few quid to help me keep the videos coming, there's links to Patreon and Ko-fi in the description. Now, here's the kicker most people don't realise about autistic frautonomy, and the reason I'm making this video today. Even after having said quite a few times so far today that frautonomy is an everyday fact of autistic life, there will still be some non-autistic folks watching who still don't get what it means in real terms. They can relate to how hard it can be to make a big decision, and they've likely scaled it down to accommodate more ordinary, mundane problems. But that's not what it feels like. Imagine, if you will, the biggest decision you could expect to ever have to make in your life. One that would live with you forever. Something that would change you. Like choosing whether or not to switch off a loved one's life support machine. They've been in a coma for I don't know how long, and the doctors say the chances of them pulling through are slim, but technically there's still hope. Maybe they need the bed and their prognosis has fallen below some threshold, or perhaps you live somewhere you'd have to pay for the care directly and the money's running out, leaving you with the choice. On or off. Possible future over definite ending. Now, take that responsibility and tension, that feeling of being on the precipice, unsure of what's for the best, who might get hurt, what grief you might feel if you get it wrong, and instead, you're not deciding whether or not to turn off the life support, not pondering the end of a life, but whether or not to have fish fingers for tea. That's not a joke or an exaggeration. That's what frautonomy can feel like, several times a day. Not all day long, and not over every decision. But any autist who lives or works with other people has at least a few frautonomy episodes every day. Seemingly trivial decisions feeling as hard to resolve and as anxiety-inducing as major, life-changing milestones. So, now we finally understood what frautonomy is and what it feels like, what can we do to reduce it so we can make life a little easier for everyone? I had a spot of frautonomy myself a day or two ago whilst I was writing up this video. I wanted to listen to that episode of Unspeakable again to make sure I got the details right, so I played it in the living room whilst Mrs. A and I were having breakfast. She recognised the episode and asked me the following question. Is this the same programme you were playing in the kitchen yesterday? And I froze in an instant. Frautonomy had me in its grip long enough for her to start looking worried and ask me if I was all right. And it took me a few more seconds to actually get my mouth to work because I was so tangled in my thoughts. Why? Because I had indeed been playing that episode on my tablet whilst I was doing something in the kitchen. But it wasn't yesterday. It was the day before that. But that was a question, not a decision, wasn't it? Not so. It was an unclear question, or perhaps better said, a question which was incorrectly framed, which forced me into a decision space. Veracity kicked in because the input data was conflicted. Yes, it was the same programme she heard me playing on my tablet, but it wasn't yesterday she heard it. So a simple yes would be inaccurate. But was it important enough to someone else to make it worth mentioning? Decision time! Do I just say yes and leave my veracity jangling like a wind chime in a hurricane? Or do I give in to my autistic nature and explain that it's yeah, but no, but essentially yeah, because I knew it was only me that actually cared about the distinction. But the frautonomy thought processes shut down my speech for a few seconds. I stuttered and spluttered before I finally thought, this is my wife. She knows I'm like this. Just tell her what's on your mind and she'll get it. So, took a deep breath, spoke my truth, and she was okay about it. But that's after 18 years of marriage. I can't solve my frautonomy so easily with everyone else. And that's where the problem lies, as with so many of the issues that make autistic life more difficult than it should be. We can't fix it on our own because we're only half the problem. Frautonomy is a problem to both sides, but only one side seems to have been making the effort to fix it so far, for the most part. Individuals like my wife and the many millions of partners, family members and friends who've taken the time to learn how to understand and accommodate for things like frautonomy have made the small but significant leap of recognising that she's as weird to me as I am to her. I love her more than life itself, but I don't see the world quite like she does, and I have to make allowances for our differences for it to work. But it wouldn't work if she didn't do her part too. Before we met, I'd had 35 years of making allowances for non-autistic people in general. I'd swallowed all sorts of indignities, insults and frustrations in the pursuit of a successful relationship up until then. I'm not saying that my exes before didn't try to meet me halfway, although we didn't have any successes. But my wife was the first person I met who accepted me for who I am, warts and all, and didn't seek to change me. She adapted to my differences and I to hers, hence why we're still together and I've not yet burned out into oblivion. The only advice that anybody can offer on either side of the frautonomy fence, whether it be the autist wringing their hands trying to come up with an answer, or the other party getting wound up and waiting for it, is to lighten up. It's more difficult from the autistic side because the combined anxiety of jangled veracity, disconnected emotions and autistic empathy can be disabling. I found myself spluttering over just a simple mix-up over timing, so imagine what it can do to me over something that actually matters. But it shouldn't be so difficult from the other side. All we're talking about there is a little patience, really. Nothing much more than that. Frautonomy doesn't last forever. Often it passes in moments once something that wasn't initially clear starts to make sense. But in those times where we're stuck in a frautonomy loop, a little gentle help is often welcome. If you realise that something you said might have been unclear to the autistic friend or relative you're talking to, you could try saying it again in a different way, or just give us a little more time to work it out. My wife sometimes helps me out by telling me she'll do something else while I think about it, taking some of the pressure off and making it easier for me to come to a conclusion. Or you could check in with us to see if there's something we need clarifying, saving us the worry of asking. All of those small gestures can and do make a huge difference to me when I'm struggling with frautonomy. For other occasions, when the frautonomy strikes us alone, we have to make our own minds up how we handle it. I'm not going to suggest anyone ignore their veracity and start making rash decisions, nor that we sacrifice our autonomy and start following the crowd for the sake of an easy life. There really is nothing wrong with needing time and good data to make decisions. There really isn't, even if the demands of a super fast, super connected, super competitive and oh so transactional world would suggest otherwise. But there are times when decisions can't be put off, or the time simply runs out and we have to act. There's some that we can do with prioritisation and planning, and others we can cover by gaming situations in advance and putting those solutions in our back pocket for later. But ultimately, we're going to get caught out at some point. Nothing that we can do on our own is ever going to be enough to completely protect us from frautonomy. But if we're not on our own, it gets a little easier. It's not enough that we only achieve that balance with people we're close to. That certainly reduces the load on both sides and reduces the chances of frautonomy between us. But the moment we step outside our safe zone, we're dealing with it again. This is why it's so important that we not only keep telling people what's going on and finding new ways of getting our point across, but we have to fight the constant feed of misinformation such as I had to do last week. Most autistic people don't want to inconvenience anyone, but we're doing it whether we want to or not. And much of that is just because most people don't know what's going on when we act a little different to their expectations. But when we actually understand who and what we're dealing with, it becomes a lot easier on both sides. It really doesn't take much adjustment to make things a lot better on this frautonomy front. A few small changes to how we interact and what we assume about each other, and a little dash of mutual patience is all it takes. We can all do that, can't we? Thank you for taking this little trip through autistic frautonomy with me. I hope it raised a smile and made a few useful connections. I'm gathering together all the feedback you've given me recently about autism and competition, and I'll be making a video about that soon. But today, I'd like to start you on a new path of research, if you're up for it. On the Patrons video I put up on Wednesday, I talked about my mum and how she helped start me on the road that led to this channel. My mum was too old for her peculiarities to be identified as autism, but we were very much alike. Most autistic people I meet have someone like my mum in their lives, a close relative who has or had no autism diagnosis, but nonetheless made us feel less alien, less out of place, because they understood us, or at least saw the world in a similar way to us. Some of us had a number of people who fit the bill, but even then there's often one person in particular who stands out. So, I'd like to find out more about those relatives and what they meant to you. What qualities did or do you share? How did they affect how you see yourself, whether for better or worse? How do you think your life might have been different if you hadn't known them? You can write in the comments below, message me on Patreon, or use the email address in the description if you prefer, but I'd love to hear from you. So, until next week here on YouTube, or Wednesday if you're a patron, I'm Quinn and I'm autistic. Thank you for watching. Responsibility, and most people feel that weight as a burden, even if it